My brother ruined the hotel I saved, so I built a competitor and ran him out of business. I gave up everything to save my family's business, only for them to betray me in the worst way possible. They handed it to my reckless brother, the same guy who nearly burned it to the ground. But here's what they didn't see coming. I wasn't going to let them win. This is a story of betrayal, revenge, and the ultimate comeback. Stick around, because trust me, you won't believe how this ends. I gripped the steering wheel tighter as I turned onto the gravel driveway of Lone Star Resort. The crunch of tires against loose stone echoed in the still Texas air, and for a brief moment, I wondered if I had made a mistake coming back. The wooden sign at the entrance, once grand and polished, now hung slightly askew, the paint peeling at the edges. The sight sent a pang through my chest. It wasn't just a resort, it was my family's legacy, the place my grandfather had built with his own 2 hands, and now it was falling apart. I exhaled slowly, trying to steady the storm brewing inside me. I had spent years in New York, climbing the ranks in hotel management, turning failing properties into 5-star destinations. I had built a name for myself in an industry that swallowed people whole, and yet, the one place that needed me the most was the one place I had spent my entire life trying to leave behind. 3 months ago, my parents had called me in desperation. The resort was drowning, bookings had plummeted, debts were piling up, and the bank was on the verge of foreclosing. Their voices trembled over the phone, and for the first time in years, I heard something I had never expected from them: fear. I had hesitated. I had spent my entire life trying to prove I was worth more than just the daughter who grew up sweeping floors and checking in guests at the front desk. But in the end, none of that mattered. Lone Star Resort wasn't just a business, it was my home, my roots, my grandfather's dream. And I wasn't about to let it die. I pulled up to the main entrance and shut off the engine. The building loomed in front of me, a shadow of what it used to be. The wooden beams, once a rich dark brown, were weathered and cracked from years of neglect. The stone pathway leading to the lobby was uneven, weeds creeping through the cracks. Even the grand chandelier inside the lobby flickered weakly, as if it too was struggling to stay alive. My stomach twisted. I had seen failing hotels before, but seeing my own home in this state was something else entirely. I stepped out of the car, the thick Texas heat wrapping around me like a suffocating blanket. The air smelled of dust, dry earth, and something faintly metallic, like rusted pipes. I took a deep breath, trying to ground myself, but the moment I pushed open the heavy wooden doors to the lobby, my composure wavered. The front desk, where I had spent countless summers watching my grandfather greet guests with a warm smile, was now cluttered with paperwork and half-empty coffee cups. The floors were dull, the once pristine furniture scuffed and faded. And then, slouched in a chair behind the desk, scrolling through his phone like he didn't have a care in the world, was Jason, my younger brother, the golden child, the one who had been handed the resort on a silver platter the moment our father stepped back due to health issues. Jason, with his ever-present smirk and a charm that got him out of more trouble than I could count, looked up and gave me a lazy grin. Well, look who finally decided to show up. I clenched my jaw, forcing a neutral expression. Jason. My voice was flat, controlled. I wasn't here to fight. Not yet. He leaned back in his chair, kicking his feet up onto the desk like he owned the place. What? No hug. No, I missed you so much, Jason. Come on, sis. I thought we were family. I ignored the bait. Where are Mom and Dad? He stretched, yawning like he'd just woken up from a nap. Dad's in the back office, probably drowning in paperwork. Mom's checking inventory in the kitchen. You know, running a resort and all. His eyes flicked to me, assessing. But I'm sure you already have a million ideas on how to fix everything, don't you? I exhaled sharply. This was exactly why I had been hesitant to come back. Jason had always been reckless, always the dreamer, the one who chased half-baked ideas and abandoned them the second they got hard. And yet, somehow, my parents still believed he was capable of running this place. They had handed him the keys to Lone Star, trusting him with everything. And now, here we were. Before I could respond, my mother's voice rang through the lobby. "Emily." I turned just in time to be pulled into a tight embrace. She smelled like vanilla and lavender, the same scent I remembered from childhood. For a brief moment, I allowed myself to sink into the familiarity of it. Then she pulled back, studying my face with a mixture of relief and guilt. "I'm so glad you're here." I nodded, my throat tight. "I need to see the books," I said, keeping my tone professional. "I want to know exactly how bad things are." My father emerged from the back office, slower than I remembered. His hair had grayed significantly, his frame thinner. He gave me a tired smile. "It's worse than we let on," he admitted. "But we can fix it. With your help." I wanted to believe that. But as I looked around at the crumbling resort, at Jason's smug expression, at the weight of years of mismanagement hanging over this place, doubt crept in. I followed my father into the office, the weight of responsibility settling heavily on my shoulders. The numbers were worse than I had imagined. The resort was bleeding money, debt had piled up, guests had stopped coming. The online reviews were brutal complaints about outdated rooms, untrained staff, broken amenities. My fingers tightened around the papers in front of me. This was bad, really bad. I glanced up at my father. His eyes held something I hadn't seen before: desperation, regret, and maybe, just maybe, a sliver of hope. I exhaled, pushing down the anger, the resentment, the sting of knowing they had only called me when they had no other choice. "I'll fix it," I said finally, my voice firm. "But we do it my way." Jason scoffed from the doorway. "Here we go." I didn't look at him. I didn't care what he thought, because this wasn't about him. This was about Lone Star Resort, and I wasn't going to let it die. I sat at the old wooden desk in the back office of the Lone Star Resort, staring at the endless rows of numbers on the financial reports spread out before me. The air smelled of aged paper and dust, the faint scent of my father's cologne lingering in the small room. A single lamp cast a dim glow over the spreadsheets, highlighting the red ink bleeding through every line. It was worse than I had imagined. Thousands of dollars in unpaid invoices. Loans stacking up with interest. Maintenance costs that had been pushed aside for far too long. Every number was another nail in the coffin of what had once been my family's pride. My fingers tapped against the edge of the desk as I fought to suppress the frustration rising in my chest. I had saved failing hotels before rundown chains in desperate need of a turnaround. But those weren't personal. This was, and the reality was sinking in fast. My parents hadn't just mismanaged Lone Star Resort. They had let Jason run it into the ground. "All right," I muttered, rubbing my temples. "Let's go over this again." My father sat across from me, his face lined with exhaustion. He looked older than I remembered, the weight of years and regret pressing down on his shoulders. My mother hovered near the door, wringing her hands as she watched me dissect every financial mistake, every oversight. And Jason, he was leaning against the bookshelf with his arms crossed, looking bored out of his mind. "Revenue is down almost 50% compared to 5 years ago," I said, flipping through the reports. "Guest occupancy is the lowest it's ever been. The online reviews." I shook my head, pulling up the most recent ones on my laptop. 1-star ratings. Complaints about dirty rooms, broken amenities, untrained staff. I looked up, my voice sharp. "This isn't just a rough patch. This is a disaster." My mother winced. "We've tried, Emily. We really have." I exhaled, forcing myself to keep my voice level. Then why is Jason still in charge? That got his attention. His smirk wavered just slightly before he pushed off the bookshelf and shrugged. "Because I'm family?" My jaw tightened. "Being family doesn't make you qualified to run a resort," he scoffed. "And what? You think you are? Just because you worked for some corporate chain in New York doesn't mean you understand this place." I understand that a business doesn't survive on wishful thinking and half-assed leadership. I shot back. Do you even have a plan? Any kind of strategy to turn things around? Jason rolled his eyes. I had ideas, but Dad kept shutting them down. I turned to my father. What kind of ideas? He hesitated, rubbing his forehead. Jason wanted to turn the resort into an exclusive experience. Increase the prices, limit access to high-paying guests. He thought rebranding it as a luxury retreat would bring in a different clientele. I stared at Jason. Did you actually put a plan in place for that? Or did you just jack up the prices and hope for the best? He shrugged again, but this time, there was something defensive in his posture. I made changes. Some worked, some didn't. I huffed a dry laugh. Some, Jason, you alienated the loyal guests who kept this place afloat for decades. You doubled the rates without improving the service, cut costs in all the wrong places, and now, we're barely hanging on. My father let out a slow sigh. She's right, Jason. That was the first time I'd ever heard my dad admit I was right over him. Jason's jaw clenched, but I didn't give him time to respond. I'm taking over, I said firmly. Starting now. The room went silent. My mother's eyes widened slightly. My father inhaled sharply, and Jason laughed. You're joking, he scoffed. You waltz in here after years of doing your own thing and just decide you're in charge? That's exactly what I'm doing. Jason shook his head, the amusement fading. No, this is still my business. I leaned forward, my voice cold. This was never your business. This was Grandpa's, then Dad's. And they trusted you with it, and you blew it. His smirk faltered. I'm not asking for permission, I continued. I'm telling you how it's going to be. I have the experience, I have the industry knowledge, and unlike you, I actually give a damn about this place. Jason looked to our parents, waiting for them to defend him. But my father didn't. He just rubbed his temples, the weight of reality finally hitting him. My mother hesitated, torn between her loyalty to her son and the undeniable truth staring her in the face. Jason, my father said finally, his voice tired. Let her try. Jason stared at him, disbelief flashing across his face. Are you serious? Dad met his gaze, steady but resigned. We don't have a choice. Jason let out a sharp breath, shaking his head. Unbelievable. I straightened, squaring my shoulders. If you really care about this place, you'll stay out of my way. He didn't respond. He just stormed out, slamming the door behind him. I turned back to my parents. I need full control. No interference. No second guessing. If I'm going to fix this, I need to do it my way. My father nodded slowly. Whatever it takes. My mother looked hesitant, but she nodded too. Just don't forget this is home, Emily. I pressed my lips together. This hadn't been home for a long time, but I didn't say that out loud. Instead, I stood, gathering the reports. I start tomorrow. As I left the office, I felt the weight of the resort pressing down on me. The broken infrastructure, the debts, the staff that had given up hope, and Jason simmering in his resentment. I had just declared war, and I wasn't going to lose. Just when I thought things couldn't get worse, I overheard my parents' real plan. They were handing everything to Jason. After all my hard work, all my sacrifices, they still chose him. But that's when I made my move. And let me tell you, it was ruthless. Now, I need to know if you were in my shoes, what would you do? Drop a 1-1 in the comments if you'd walk away and let them fail, or at woo22fut if you'd fight back and make them regret it. The next morning, I stepped into the lobby of Lone Star Resort, the weight of my decision settling deep in my bones. The sunlight streamed through the tall glass windows, casting long shadows across the dusty wooden floors. This place, once the pride of my family, had become a skeleton of what it used to be, and now it was my responsibility to bring it back to life. The front desk was empty except for an old bell and a barely functional computer. A faded guestbook lay open, its pages smudged with ink from long-forgotten reservations. I could hear the faint hum of an outdated ceiling fan struggling against the thick Texas heat. Everything about this place screamed neglect, and it made my blood boil. I had spent the past decade working in five-star hotels, managing luxury properties where excellence wasn't optional, it was expected. But here, standards had been tossed aside like yesterday's garbage. And Jason, my useless, entitled brother, had been the one holding the reins. I tightened my grip on the clipboard in my hands, my nails pressing into the paper. If I was going to fix this, I needed to start immediately. No hesitation, no second guessing. I turned toward the front desk and rang the bell once, the sharp clang echoing through the empty lobby. Within seconds, Sarah, the longtime front desk manager, hurried out from the back office, her expression shifting from exhaustion to surprise. When she saw me, "Emily," she breathed, adjusting the glasses perched on her nose. "Didn't think I'd see you here this early." I offered a tight smile. Figured I'd get a head start. "Can you gather the staff for a meeting in the dining hall?" 10 minutes. Her eyebrows lifted slightly, but she nodded. "Of course." I watched as she disappeared down the hallway, her steps hurried. I knew what she was thinking. This wasn't the Emily Carter they remembered. The girl who left Texas all those years ago, chasing dreams that had nothing to do with this place. But I had changed. I wasn't here to prove anything anymore. I was here to take control. By the time I walked into the dining hall, most of the staff was already there, scattered around the room in small clusters. A few sat at tables, others leaned against the walls, arms crossed. The air was thick with uncertainty. They weren't sure what to expect from me. And honestly, I didn't blame them. I stepped forward, my voice steady. "I know things have been rough. I won't waste your time pretending otherwise." A murmur rippled through the group. Some nodded. Others shifted uncomfortably. I continued. "Lone Star Resort is failing. That's not an opinion. That's a fact. And if we don't turn this place around fast, there won't be a resort left to save." A woman near the back, Maria, one of the senior housekeepers, crossed her arms. "And what exactly do you plan to do about it?" I met her gaze head on. "Everything." A hush fell over the room. I let the silence stretch for a moment before speaking again. This resort used to be something special. People came here because it felt like home. It had character, it had charm, and somewhere along the way, we lost that. But I refused to let it die. I took a slow breath. "So here's what's going to happen. Effective immediately, we're making changes. First, guest service is our priority. No more half-hearted hospitality. Every guest who walks through that door needs to feel like they belong here. That means cleaner rooms, faster service, and attention to detail." A few heads nodded. "Good." Second, we're revamping the marketing. I've already started working on partnerships with travel agencies and influencers. We're launching promotions, updating our website, and pushing new branding. Lone Star Resort isn't just going to survive, it's going to thrive. Maria narrowed her eyes. "And Jason?" I clenched my jaw. Jason is no longer in charge. That got their attention. Some exchanged glances, whispers buzzing through the room. Jason had been running this place like a joke for years. They didn't trust him. But me? They weren't sure yet. Sarah spoke up. "And what about us? Are we keeping our jobs?" I didn't hesitate. "Not just keeping them. I'm giving you a reason to stay. Competitive pay. Better working conditions. And respect, something I know you haven't been getting for a long time." That struck a nerve. Maria let out a small, approving grunt. I crossed my arms. "But understand this, if you're here, you're expected to work. No shortcuts. No laziness. If you're not ready to commit, walk away now." Silence. No one moved. Then slowly, Sarah nodded. "I'm in." One by one, the others followed. Maria, the kitchen staff, the maintenance crew, even the younger employees who had been eyeing me skeptically. I exhaled, tension easing slightly from my shoulders. This was step one. Now, the real work began. The moment the staff meeting ended, I wasted no time diving headfirst into fixing Lone Star Resort. I knew I had to move fast. Every second counted. The bank wasn't going to wait forever, and I wasn't about to let all my hard work go to waste. The first thing I did was overhaul the booking system. The old software was outdated, slow, and full of glitches that made even the simplest reservation a nightmare. Guests would call in to book a stay, only to be told their rooms weren't available due to some technical error. It was a mess. I contacted an old colleague from my days in New York, someone who specialized in hospitality tech, and within 24 hours, we had a brand new system in place, sleek, modern, and most importantly, functional. Then came the marketing. Lone Star Resort had been running on word of mouth for years, which might have worked a decade ago, but times had changed. If we wanted new guests, we needed to be visible. I reached out to travel bloggers, influencers, and industry insiders, offering exclusive stays in exchange for promotion. I revamped the website, updated the branding, and launched targeted ads. Within days, we saw a spike in inquiries, nothing huge yet, but enough to prove that people were interested. But just when I thought I was finally making progress, Jason decided to make his grand return. It happened late in the afternoon. I was standing at the front desk with Sarah, going over guest check-ins, when the front doors swung open and in walked Jason, acting like he owned the place. He wore that same arrogant smirk I'd come to despise, dressed in a wrinkled button-down and jeans that looked like he'd slept in them. "Well, if it isn't the prodigal daughter," he drawled, clapping his hands together. "Didn't think you'd last this long. I didn't even look up from the check-in list. Didn't think you'd bother showing your face." Sarah stiffened beside me, shifting uncomfortably. She knew better than to get in the middle of whatever was about to happen. Jason leaned against the counter, lowering his voice just enough so only I could hear. "You really think you can waltz in here and take over? That you can just push me out?" I looked up then, meeting his gaze head-on. "I don't think, Jason. I know." His smirk faltered for half a second before he forced a laugh. "Mom and Dad won't let that happen." I exhaled sharply, shaking my head. "You still don't get it, do you? Mom and Dad aren't the ones keeping this place running. I am. You were handed everything on a silver platter, and you still managed to screw it up." His jaw tightened, the easy arrogance flickering into something else, something raw. "You think you're better than me?" "No," I said simply. "I know I am." Silence stretched between us, thick with years of unspoken resentment. Then Jason pushed off the counter, his smirk returning, but this time it didn't quite reach his eyes. "This isn't over," he said, voice low. "Not by a long shot." And with that, he turned and walked out, leaving behind the faint scent of cheap cologne and desperation. I let out a slow breath, ignoring the way my hands trembled slightly at my sides. I wasn't afraid of Jason, not anymore, but I knew him well enough to know that he wasn't going to just sit back and let me take over. He would fight me on this, tooth and nail. And if he couldn't win the right way, he'd try something else. Something underhanded. I glanced at Sarah, who was watching me carefully. "You okay?" she asked. I nodded, forcing a small smile. "Yeah." But the truth was, I wasn't sure. Because if there was one thing I'd learned over the years, it was this. Jason never played fair. And whatever he was planning next, it wasn't going to be good. Jason didn't waste any time making his move. Within days of his dramatic reappearance, I started noticing the little things, subtle, calculated disruptions that seemed harmless on the surface, but had the potential to spiral into major problems. At first, it was just an offhand remark from a housekeeper about new management changes that I hadn't authorized. Then, the kitchen staff mentioned that Jason had been hanging around, making suggestions about cost-cutting measures, things that would streamline operations, his favorite way of saying cut corners in all the wrong places. I knew what he was doing. He was trying to undermine me from the inside out, planting seeds of doubt, making it seem like I was the outsider while he was the rightful heir to Lone Star Resort. And the worst part? Some of the staff were actually buying into it. One morning, I walked into the break room to find a small group of employees huddled together, whispering in hushed voices. The second they saw me, they clammed up, their eyes darting away like kids caught passing notes in class. I could feel the shift the same way the air changes before a storm. Jason was feeding them a narrative, twisting things to make it look like I was just another executive swooping in to fix something I didn't understand. I set my coffee down on the counter and leaned against the fridge, my voice casual but firm. "Something on your minds?" A few of them exchanged uneasy glances before Sarah Loyal, dependable Sarah, finally spoke. "Jason's been saying that once things get stable, he's taking over again." She hesitated. "Is that true?" I clenched my jaw, biting back the immediate surge of frustration. Of course he was spreading lies. That was his specialty. "No," I said, my voice sharp enough to cut through the tension. "Jason doesn't make the decisions around here. I do." One of the younger staff members, Mark, shifted awkwardly. "It's just," he said, "the resort's always been a family-run business. And, well," he trailed off, not meeting my eyes. I exhaled slowly. I knew what he was implying. Jason, for all his faults, had history here. He had been the golden son, the one who was supposed to inherit it all while I had left. And now, despite the fact that I had poured my blood, sweat, and savings into saving this place, there were still people who saw him as the rightful successor simply because of his last name. I straightened, leveling them all with a steady gaze. "Listen to me," I said, my tone leaving no room for argument. "Jason had his chance to run this place, and you all saw how that turned out. If he was capable, we wouldn't be in this mess to begin with. I'm not here to patch things up so he can swoop in and take over again. I'm here to fix what's broken for good." A heavy silence filled the room. Then Sarah nodded, the tension in her shoulders easing. That's all I needed to hear. One by one, the others nodded as well. Some slower than others, but it was enough. I turned to leave, but before I could step out the door, I caught sight of Jason leaning against the hallway wall, arms crossed, watching me with that infuriating smirk. "Nice speech," he drawled, pushing off the wall. "Too bad words don't mean much around here." I kept my expression blank, refusing to take the bait. "You're wasting your time, Jason. They're not going to follow you." He laughed, shaking his head. "You really think you've won, don't you?" His smirk widened. "You don't get it, sis. This place isn't just about who's in charge. It's about who people believe should be in charge. And let's be honest, when people look at you, they don't see Lone Star. They see an outsider playing boss." My nails dug into my palm, but I refused to let him see how much that stung. "Enjoy your little power trip while it lasts," he continued, his voice almost amused. "Because the second you slip up, the second you show them that you don't belong here, they'll turn on you, just like they always do." And with that, he walked away, leaving a storm brewing in my chest. I didn't go back to my office. I didn't pace or dwell or let the frustration eat away at me. Instead, I took a deep breath, squared my shoulders, and did the one thing Jason never expected. I fought back. Jason had underestimated me. He thought I would play nice, that I would sit back and let him undermine everything I had built. But he forgot one thing: I wasn't that naive little sister anymore. I was the one who had sacrificed everything to save this place, and I wasn't about to let him waltz in and take it away from me. The first thing I did was tighten my grip on operations. If Jason wanted to spread doubt and confusion, I was going to make it impossible for him to gain any real footing. I called an emergency staff meeting the next morning. Every department head, every key employee, all gathered in the main dining hall before the first guests even woke up. I stood at the front, arms crossed, and got straight to the point. I know there's been some uncertainty about who's running this resort, so let me make it clear I am. Not Jason, not anyone else. Me. A few people shifted uncomfortably, but most held my gaze. "This isn't about family politics," I continued, my voice firm. "This is about business. This resort was failing before I came back, and now, for the first time in years, we're on track to turn a profit. That doesn't happen by accident. It happens because of leadership, because of smart decisions, because of teamwork. And if anyone thinks we should go back to the way things were, if anyone thinks Jason is somehow the answer, then I suggest you take a good, Hard look at the numbers. I turned to Sarah, who had a folder in front of her, already prepared. She stepped forward, flipping it open to reveal the latest financial reports. Since restructuring, occupancy rates are up by 35%, she said. Guest satisfaction scores have increased by nearly 20%. Online bookings? Up 50%. And that's just the beginning. I let that sink in for a moment before I spoke again. These aren't just numbers. This is proof. Proof that we're moving in the right direction. And I need to know, are you with me? There was a beat of silence. Then Sarah nodded. I'm in. One by one, the others followed. Mark, Maria, the head chef, even the maintenance crew. Jason might have been working behind the scenes to turn people against me, but what he didn't understand was that leadership wasn't just about titles. It was about trust, and he had lost that a long time ago. Still, I knew Jason wouldn't give up that easily. And I was right. Later that evening, I caught him in the lobby, talking to one of the newer front desk clerks. The girl looked nervous, glancing between Jason and the check-in computer like she didn't know what to do. Something wrong? I asked, stepping beside them. Jason turned to me with that same cocky smirk, just checking in, making sure things are running smoothly. I folded my arms. And you need to be behind the desk for that? He shrugged. Thought I'd lend a hand. You know, show them how things are really done around here. I smiled, but there was nothing friendly about it. You don't work here, Jason. You don't make decisions. You don't train employees. You don't show them how things are done. You're a guest, at best. And guests don't belong behind the front desk. The young clerk swallowed hard and quickly stepped away from him, resuming her work as if she had just realized she was caught in the middle of something much bigger than a simple conversation. Jason exhaled through his nose, the smirk slipping for just a second. You really think you're in control here, don't you? I stepped closer, lowering my voice just enough so only he could hear me. No, Jason, I know I am. For a second, something flickered in his eyes. Frustration, maybe even anger, but then he stepped back, holding up his hands. All right, boss. Whatever you say. I didn't move until he was out the door. This wasn't over. But I had won this round, and I was ready for whatever came next. Jason had finally pushed too far. I knew he was desperate. The signs had been there for weeks, his attempts to undermine me with the staff, his pathetic efforts to take credit for my success, his quiet meetings with our parents where he tried to convince them that I was the problem, not the solution. But now he had crossed the line. I stood in the office, my fingers curled tightly around the edge of my desk, staring at the email on my screen. It was from a travel blogger, one of the industry influencers I had personally invited to Lone Star Resort to help rebuild its reputation. She had been scheduled to stay for a week, an all-expenses paid trip in exchange for an honest review. But now she wasn't coming, because Jason had gotten to her first. He had reached out behind my back, fed her some nonsense about uncertain leadership and potential management shifts. He had made it sound like Lone Star was unstable, that my position was temporary, that investing her time in a review wouldn't be worth it. And it worked. She had politely declined the stay, apologizing for the unfortunate timing and concerns about long-term business stability. I clenched my jaw so hard it hurt. This wasn't just about a lost review. This was sabotage. Jason had deliberately tanked an opportunity that could have solidified Lone Star's comeback, all because he couldn't stand the fact that I was succeeding. He didn't want the resort to thrive under my leadership. If he couldn't have it, he'd rather watch it burn. Fine. If Jason wanted a war, I'd give him one. I pushed back from my desk and grabbed my phone, dialing Sarah. She picked up on the second ring. What's up, boss? I need you to do something for me, I said, keeping my voice calm even though my blood was boiling. Pull the guest logs for the past 2 months. I want to see every VIP reservation Jason has had a hand in. Sarah didn't even hesitate. On it. I ended the call and took a slow breath, forcing myself to think. Jason thought he was being clever, playing his little power games in the shadows. But what he didn't understand was that I was Lone Star Resort. The staff trusted me. The guests respected me. The industry recognized me. He could try to poison the well all he wanted, but at the end of the day, I controlled the water supply. I wouldn't just stop him, I'd erase him. Sarah met me in the conference room an hour later, a printed stack of guest records in her hands. "It's worse than we thought," she said, setting them down in front of me. "Jason's been comping rooms for his friends, not just travel influencers, but personal connections. And I don't mean one-night stays. I'm talking full weekend packages, meals included, spa services, the whole 9 yards." I skimmed through the list, my stomach twisting with fury. These weren't potential business partners. These were freeloaders, people Jason had invited for no reason other than to make himself look important. "How much has this cost us?" I asked, my voice like ice. Sarah hesitated. Then, north of 20 grand. I exhaled slowly. $20,000. Gone. Just to feed Jason's ego. It was time to cut him off. Effective immediately. "I want every single one of Jason's guests flagged in the system," I said, flipping through the pages. "If they're already booked, they'll be required to pay full price. No exceptions." Sarah nodded. "And if Jason pushes back?" I smiled, cold and sharp. "Let him. He doesn't have any real power here, and it's time he learns that." Jason found out that afternoon. I was in the lobby, overseeing a new furniture delivery when he stormed in, his face red with rage. "What the hell, Emily?" he barked, shoving a printout of the new guest policy in my face. "You're seriously charging my guests?" I barely spared him a glance. "No, Jason. The resort is charging freeloaders for using our amenities." "You can't do this," he snapped. "Mom and Dad," I cut him off, "are no longer in charge. I am. And last I checked, you don't have an official position at Lone Star, do you?" His mouth opened, then closed. I stepped closer, lowering my voice. "You've been running around this place like you own it, racking up thousands of dollars in losses, sabotaging my work, feeding lies to people in the industry, all because you can't stand the fact that I'm better at this than you." Jason flinched, just slightly. I let the silence stretch, let him feel the weight of his failure pressing down on him. "You've lost, Jason," I said quietly. "You just haven't realized it yet." I turned on my heel and walked away, leaving him standing there, his fists clenched at his sides. I didn't need to see his face to know I had just delivered the first real blow. But this wasn't over. Not yet. Jason wasn't done yet. I should have known. I had backed him into a corner, stripped him of his last illusions of control, and Jason, like the entitled, reckless brat he had always been, did exactly what I expected. He lashed out. But this time, he didn't come at me directly. No, he was smarter than that. This time, he went after the one thing that could still hurt me, Lone Star itself. It started with a phone call. I was in my office, reviewing financials for the next quarter, when Sarah burst in, her face pale. "We have a problem." I looked up, immediately on edge. "What happened?" She tossed a thick folder onto my desk. "Jason's been talking to investors. And not just talking, he's been trying to sell." For a moment, I couldn't breathe. I flipped open the folder, scanning the documents. They weren't fake. Jason had been meeting with outside buyers, trying to secure a deal to sell Lone Star Resort out from under us. He couldn't run it, couldn't fix it, so instead he was going to cash out. The audacity, the sheer, unbelievable arrogance. He was willing to burn everything to the ground rather than admit that he had failed. I pushed back from my desk, my heartbeat hammering against my ribs. "Who's he talking to?" Sarah hesitated. "You're not going to like it." I gave her a sharp look. "Sarah," she sighed. "The Blackwood Group." I went cold. The Blackwood Group was a notorious corporate acquisition firm. They didn't buy businesses to run them, they bought them to gut them. They'd strip Lone Star down to its bones, sell off the land, and demolish what was left. Every memory, every piece of history, every ounce of blood, sweat, and sacrifice that had gone into building Lone Star would be erased. I gripped the edge of my desk, forcing myself to stay calm. How close is the deal? They're interested, but nothing's signed yet. That was something. I took a deep breath, my mind racing. Jason had gone nuclear, and now I had no choice but to meet him on his level. If he wanted to play dirty, I'd show him what it meant to really play dirty. I grabbed my phone and dialed. The call rang twice before a familiar voice answered. Emily. David Lawson, investor strategist, art ruthless businessman. And, more importantly, my silent ally in all of this. I need your help, I said without preamble. David chuckled. Jason, I assume? I exhaled sharply. He's trying to sell Lone Star to Blackwood. The humor vanished from his voice. That's bad. Yeah, I need to stop it. There was a pause. Then, tell me what you need. The next morning, I was waiting in the Lone Star conference room when Jason walked in. He wasn't expecting me. That much was obvious from the way he hesitated at the door, his smirk faltering for just a fraction of a second. Emily, he drawled, recovering quickly. Didn't know we had a meeting. I leaned back in my chair, folding my arms. We don't, but I figured I'd save you the trouble of sneaking around and just come to you directly. Jason cocked his head. Sneaking around? I smiled. Let's not play games, Jason. I know you've been talking to Blackwood. His smirk widened. Business is business. No, Jason. Business is working towards success. What you're doing is selling out. He shrugged, pretending to be unaffected. You don't run this place. Mom and Dad do. And if I can convince them that a sale is the best option, then I cut him off. They won't. Jason laughed. Oh, yeah? And why's that? I slid a document across the table. Because I already outplayed you. He frowned, picking it up. As he scanned the pages, his expression darkened. I let the silence drag out before finally speaking. That's a counter-offer from the Lawson Group. Jason's eyes snapped up. I went to the board before you did. Made a better pitch. A real pitch. One that keeps Lone Star running and makes sure you don't have any authority in the future. Jason's knuckles whitened as he gripped the papers. You can't do this. Oh, Jason, I said, tilting my head. I already did. His breathing quickened. Mom and Dad are signing the papers tonight, I said smoothly. By the end of the day, your deal with Blackwood will be dead, and Lone Star, it'll be mine. Jason shoved back from the table, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. This isn't over. I stood up slowly. Yes, Jason, it is. He stormed out, slamming the door behind him. I let out a breath. I had won, but somehow I knew Jason wasn't finished yet. Jason was gone. Not physically, he was still somewhere, licking his wounds, figuring out his next move. But for the first time in my life, he was no longer my problem. Lone Star was mine. Legally, financially, irrevocably mine. And yet, as I stood in the empty office that used to belong to my father, staring out over the land that had defined my entire childhood, I felt nothing. No relief, no vindication, no sense of victory. Just a quiet, unsettling emptiness. I had spent my whole life trying to prove myself to people who had never really seen me. My parents, Jason, the world. I had fought, clawed, sacrificed, pushed myself past every limit to be the best, to be undeniable. And now that I had finally won, I realized something that should have been obvious all along. I had never actually wanted Lone Star. The weight of it hit me like a freight train. I had poured months of my life into saving this place not just to preserve the legacy, but to prove a point. That I was better. That I was the one who should have been in charge all along. And now that I had it, now that Jason was out of the picture, it felt like I had been fighting for something that had never really been mine to begin with. I exhaled, running a hand through my hair. The room felt suffocating. The walls were closing in. I needed air. Stepping outside, I let the warm Texas breeze wash over me. The sky was a deep, endless blue, the kind that stretched on forever, the sun casting golden light over the hills. Lone Star was beautiful, still standing, still breathing because of me. And yet, when I closed my eyes, all I could see was Silver Creek. I turned my phone over in my hand, hesitating. Then, before I could talk myself out of it, I dialed. It rang twice before Lisa picked up. "Emily," she greeted, her voice unreadable. "Didn't think I'd be hearing from you so soon." I swallowed hard. "How's it going over there?" There was a pause. Then, "It's going." I exhaled sharply. "And the offer?" Lisa hesitated. Still on the table, my heart pounded. "I want it." Silence. "Then, you're sure?" I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. "Yeah, I'm sure." Lisa let out a slow breath. "All right. I'll make the call." I hung up before I could second-guess myself. Silver Creek was mine. The news hit Lone Star like a thunderclap. I didn't waste time. The transition was already in motion before the staff even had a chance to process it. I had no intention of running 2 resorts at once, and Lone Star, while still standing, wasn't where my heart was. I made the announcement 2 days later, a full staff meeting. Everyone was gathered in the main dining hall: Sarah, Maria, the maintenance crew, the front desk clerks, even the housekeepers. Faces I had known for years, people who had stood by me through everything. I took a deep breath. "I have an announcement," I said, my voice steady. "I've made a decision. I'm leaving Lone Star." The silence was deafening. Sarah's eyes widened. "Wait, what?" I nodded. "I'm not abandoning it. I found a buyer, someone who understands what this place means, someone who's going to keep it alive. But I won't be the one running it anymore." Murmurs spread through the room. Shock. Confusion. Maria crossed her arms. "And what about you?" I exhaled. "I'm taking Silver Creek." That sent a ripple through the crowd. A few people looked at each other, putting the pieces together. Mark, one of the younger staff members, let out a low whistle. "You're serious?" I smiled, just a little. "Dead serious." More murmurs. Then Sarah stepped forward, arms still crossed, but something like understanding in her eyes. "You finally realized it, huh?" I met her gaze. "Yeah, I did." She studied me for a long moment. Then, finally, she nodded. "Good. It's about damn time," Maria huffed. "Well, hell, if you think I'm sticking around here, you're out of your mind." A few chuckles spread through the room, but I didn't miss the meaning behind her words. I straightened. "Listen, I'm not forcing anyone to make a decision right now, but if any of you want to come with me, there's a place for you at Silver Creek." Silence. Then, one by one, the hands went up. Sarah, Maria, Mark, half the damn room. I felt my throat tighten. "You're sure?" Sarah smirked. "We've been sure since the day Jason took over." I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. Lone Star would survive. But Silver Creek? Silver Creek was about to thrive. The day I walked away from Lone Star for the last time, I expected to feel something. Sadness. Regret. Nostalgia. Something. But as I stood in the parking lot, staring up at the building that had defined my entire childhood, all I felt was peace. Jason was gone. My parents had finally seen the truth. And me? I was free. I turned, stepping into my car, gripping the wheel as the weight of it all settled over me. For the first time in my life, I wasn't fighting to prove myself. For the first time in my life, I was fighting for me, and I had already won. And, just like that, I walked away, not as the daughter they underestimated, but as the woman who built something greater than they ever imagined. Jason? He lost everything. And my parents? They had no choice but to watch me succeed. But now, I want to hear from you. Have you ever been underestimated, overlooked, or taken for granted? How did you handle it? Drop your story in the comments. And if you loved this journey, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share, because success isn't given, it's taken. Success isn't about seeking approval, it's about knowing your worth and refusing to let others define it. I spent years proving myself to people who never truly saw me, and in the end, I realized something crucial. I didn't need their validation. In America, opportunities don't come from waiting, they come from taking control. If you're overlooked, don't beg to be noticed. Build something so undeniable they have no choice but to watch. And when they finally see your value, it won't even matter, because by then, you'll have already won.